Well, I appreciate it. My name is Reese. I grew up in Tyner. Went away to Florida State University for college. Got into the business field for a period of time, and then came back to Marshall County. If there were three things, and I'm 70 years old, and I've been retired for about a year, which means that I've gotten an opportunity to look back and try to get a perspective on myself and athletics and what they've meant to me. So as I look back, there are three things that have been a major influence in my career. The first one would be, and these are not in any order, but the first one would be to become a follower of Jesus Christ. The second one would have been the marriage to my wife, and the third one would have been athletics. Athletics has had a major role in my life, where I've been, where I've gone. As I said, I went to Florida State because I could play baseball. I was a catcher at Florida State, and from Florida State, and when I was at Florida State, I got a degree to coach. So then I came back to Marshall County and started out coaching at Divine Heart Seminary, and after that went on to Culver Community High School, and after that I went into business for a period of time, and then I came back to Marshall County and was working with my wife, and she had a flower shop in Walkerton, and she was continually praying that I'd find something else. So I was very fortunate. A gentleman from Marshall County by the name of Denny Bevel called me on the phone one day and said, "Hey, we've got an opportunity here at Ancilla College. We're looking for a head basketball coach and an athletic director." And so I went in, interviewed, met with the president, it was Dr. Bill Shostowski at that time. That would have been in March of '95. And he said to me, "We would like to build an athletic program here at Ancilla College." So my focus over the whole time was building an athletic program. My vision for the Ancilla College athletic program was where it finally came out in the end, which was 20 plus years later. We started out with no players, no coaches, no budget, no transportation, you name it, we started from scratch. And we just every single year tried to get just a little bit better than we were the year before. And so the final year that I was there, which was a year ago, we had a team that had gone to the national championship in soccer. We had a team that went to the national championship in basketball. We had a team that was absolutely the best #1 junior college team in the country for over 6 weeks. So it wasn't my goal. It was my goal to get better competitively, but our goal is to use athletics, and athletics had been so important in my life, to use athletics to help student athletes get an education and move on to a career. And so one of our coaches was responsible for making sure kids were in class, making sure kids were doing well in the classroom. If they weren't, they didn't play. So I think the overall thing that I take most satisfaction of is that all of those individuals that we had at Ancilla, even though maybe they weren't the best basketball player or soccer or tennis or whatever the sport was, they all got an education. And 80% of the student athletes that we had went on to 4-year schools. So that was kind of one of the things that I was the most proud of. And like I say, we did finally get to the point where we were very competitive athletically. But I remember when I started, I was on my knees begging coaches around here, if I was a basketball coach, begging them if I could get their 8th or 9th player to coach or to play. And unfortunately, at the end, we were recruiting most of the people from around the country, and also soccer-wise, we were recruiting key people from around the world. So there for a period of time, we were really recruiting a lot of Marshall County, and our focus was on Marshall County. If you look in the Pilot newspaper, still do, under your hometown college are the Ancilla scores. So I feel like that we made a big impact on Marshall County. We also gave, there were some really good student athletes that came to Ancilla College that just didn't want to get far away from home. And now we gave them an opportunity to really compete in the conference that we were in, which was the Michigan Community College Athletic Association, was the premier conference in the nation. So those student athletes got an opportunity to compete in the best conference in the country. And I would suggest that between 25 and 30% of our student athletes went on to play at other colleges. So we had 3 or 4 of them that went on to Division I schools. So I feel like that we gave Marshall County an opportunity to stay close to home, get a good education, and still compete athletically.
So let's go back to your high school days. You said you were a catcher. How was that? Did you have a coach who was influential to you?
So I grew up in Tyner.
Tell me a little bit about Tyner.
I can't tell you why, but it was a little bit beyond Little House on the Prairie. But Tyner was a really, really unique place. Everybody that went to the school we were all friends. It was kind of like a family away from your family. And so yes, and of course Tyner being a very, very small school, they only offered certain athletic programs. And in the winter it was basketball, which I played. In the spring it was baseball, which I played. And I was very fortunate. I loved baseball. It is my number one major sport that I like the most. But I'd watch the games on television. I'd listen to what the players said about how to do this and how to do that. And then I realized that if you were going to ever have a career in athletics or in baseball, catching was the place to go, because nobody wanted to put on that gear and be hot and be hurt. And so I learned how to be a catcher. I was good enough. Probably one of the major influences in my life in terms of athletics was Jim Drews. Jim Drews was a Marshall County, Knox kind of guy, lived in this area, and went on to be a state representative for this area. So he made a big influence in my life. And then also I had a coach in Walkerton by the name of Jim Ridenauer. He was my Legion coach in baseball. So I learned a lot from him about being a good catcher. Then I went on to, like I say, play at Florida State, and my coach down there was Fred Hatfield. He was a major league player for the Detroit Tigers and the White Sox for a period of time. So I learned a lot about being a catcher. I had a good career at Florida State. I enjoyed it. I wasn't good enough to be drafted. So from there, I went on to come back to Marshall County and teach at Divine Heart Seminary at that point.
Tell me a little bit about Divine Heart. I don't know too much about it. So.
Divine Heart was a school of a religious order that students from all over the country came from. They were very, very weak athletically. Most of them had not had a lot of athletics experience, so I came to, this is an interesting situation, but I came at Divine Heart, halftime head baseball and head basketball coach right out of college, which, I wasn't as smart as I thought I was, but other halftime I worked for the state highway for Al Nixon, who you can carry the career through Bill and Rusty and all of the Nixons, that there are big influences in Marshall County, but didn't have a baseball field, so we built one. They did have a gym, but it was a good experience for me to get an opportunity to see the kind of cultures that different people lived in. This wasn't the Marshall County culture. There were Marshall County kids there, but this was kids, like I say, from all over the country. Athletically, I did not do very good in basketball. I think my best year, we might have won 3 games. But in baseball, they'd never had a winning season, and we never had a losing season while I coached. Now, you're going to say, and I understand this, I knew more about baseball than I did about basketball, even though I played. But then, by the time I got to Ancilla to coach basketball, I had learned a lot more. But Divine Heart was a really, really interesting place. One of my major responsibilities was to keep the guys away from the girls at Ancilla. So, but we didn't do very good at that. But but it was a good experience for me. I learned a lot. And then I moved on to Culver High School, Culver Community, and Culver's a nice, good. I enjoyed it at Culver. Good people. We won a baseball sectional there, which was the first sectional that they had ever won in men's basketball. They had won one, I believe, in women's basketball. Excuse me. This was in men's baseball. The women had won, I believe, a sectional. And then we had really worked hard to create a program. When I left there, they won 2 or 3 after me, which I felt very good about. So, like I say, then I went out into the work world, and I could not have been the athletic director at Ancilla College if I hadn't gone into the work world. I learned a lot about budgets, about where to use your money, where not to use your money, how to make sure that you only use the money that you had. Being an athletic director is twofold. It's one, managing your money, and for me, I always thought of myself as the coach of coaches. And my job, and if we were going to be successful at Ancilla, my job was to hire the best people that I could. And when I looked for those people, I were looking for people that were very ethical, people that were very committed to academics, and then people that had had a good college or a good high school coaching career. And we were very successful there because of the people that we hired.
So how did your coaching philosophy, you hadn't coached basketball before. How did that coaching philosophy develop for you? How did you try to connect with the athletes there, say?
The secret to being a good, in my opinion, to being a good coach is to be respected, but also to find out, if you want to motivate somebody, no matter how it is, whether it's in basketball or baseball or whether it's a job that they're doing, you have to find out what it is that person wants. If I can find out what you want, do you want to go on to college and be a doctor? Do you want to go on to college and be a basketball player? What do you want to go on? That's the way that my philosophy was. I wanted to get to know the player well enough that all success, even in the classroom, when I was in the classroom, and I would be teaching health or math or something like that. The first thing you have to do is you have to find out what motivates that person, what it is that makes them want to be in that math classroom and do a good job for you. And then the second thing is that you have to understand the fundamentals, and then you have to have drills that they can do that helps them get better in the fundamentals. But always trying to look out. That relationship that you had with your players, they needed to understand that you were looking out for their best interest, and so they had to understand that if they didn't go to class, they'd tell you, well, I want to be a coach. I want to go on and be a coach. Well, you can't go on and be a coach if you miss classes and you don't go on to another school and get your degree. So once you could figure out what motivated them, then you could figure out how we could sit down and talk about how you get better, And our goal was, you come in here at one level, and by the time you leave, we want you to be better. We want you to be successful here, and still be in a 2-year school. We realized that a lot of the student athletes were not going to just get a 2-year degree and go out into the workforce. Some did, but like I say, the majority of them went on to 4-year schools. So go to class, do your job in the classroom, get your degree, and then move on to a 4-year school, get your degree there, and go into life as to what you want to do in life.
So did you have any rivals during your coaching career that you'd get a little bit more juiced up to play against a certain team, or was there?
Well, when you were at Divine Heart, there weren't any. Okay, you weren't really as an example, when I was at Culver, it was Argus. Okay, when I was at Culver, it was Argus. That was the, although we didn't have very many, but if you had a season a bad season, you beat Argus, that made your season, But Divine Heart was didn't have many relationships at Divine Heart with other schools. We did play the local schools, the Culvers and the Oregon Davises and the Plymouths and all those kind of schools, but didn't really have a big rivalry there. Of course, when you were at Tyner, your big rivalry was La Paz. So, it was similar in that game. No matter how many games, if you beat La Paz, it's a successful season. At least, those were your buddies, and and you guys talked back and forth, and so you felt like at least we could talk winning to the La Paz people. So that was fun.
Any games from that rivalry that stand out to you?
No. The only game that I can remember, the only game that in the back of my mind stands out as a game that I can remember was when we won the first sectional at Culver. We went on to play Kokomo in the first game of the regional. Kokomo had a young man by the name of Underwood who had already signed a minor league baseball contract. He was a pitcher and a shortstop. And when we went down to play them, of course we were Culver, and we were not going to beat anybody. So he played shortstop and didn't pitch. We ended up winning the game 3-1, and it's a great example of, in any kind of sports, which I learned later on, is you just got to win the game in front of you. You can't worry about the game tomorrow, and you can't worry about the game next week. You got to win the game today. And I'm sure that they were very disappointed that the young man that was signed to play with the Detroit Tigers was sitting on the sidelines. Ended up in the finals of the regional getting beat by Logansport, who at that point in time were the premier baseball team in Indiana, and they went on to win the state tournament. So that's the one game that I remember, and it's the game that I took something out of that I never made that mistake in my coaching career. Whatever it was, you never looked by anybody, no matter what size they were or what their record was. You won that game today, and then you went on tomorrow to try to win the next one.
So what do you think it was about that group of students that they were able to, accomplish that?
one of the things that I found in high school, and I can see it in the Oregon Davises, and I can also see it in the Culvers, and that is when you're at a small school, I'm sure people will understand this, but I call it's cyclical. That is, you will have a class that is really, really a good class. Because of the size of students, you know, it's not a South Bend where every year you have good people coming along. And in Culver, we just had a really, really good group, and the core of that group that year were juniors. Had a few really good seniors. Example of one might be a Larry Fallstitch, who is a banker here in town at First Federal. But we had a good junior class and then a decent sophomore class, but it's cyclical. And so, you know, you take those kids for anywhere as far as they can take you, and then unfortunately they move on, and you have to move on with what you have. So yeah, that's what I see. I saw that they were really a good group of kids, not only athletically, but they were a good group of people individually as well.
How about building the basketball program at Ancilla? Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, did they have a basketball program before you came, or was it?
They had a basketball program before I came. And I would, you know, I say many times that I started the program at Ancilla. I probably just changed it. It was a basketball program that played. The best team we probably played was a Bethel JV. All right, we played Plymouth Lumber, okay, Knox Water. We just played independent kind of teams. But what I wanted to do, and what I did was, first thing I did in the first couple years was I got us into the National Junior College Athletic Association. I want us associated with a national organization. And then about the fourth year, I was very fortunate to get us into the Michigan Community College Athletic Association, which are all Division II schools. And in a Division II school, you can offer athletic scholarships, but you can't offer housing and those kind of things. So we were competing against colleges that were similar to us, but all of those kind of things raises your level. You have to be able to compete better to be able to be in the national conference, and you have to be able to compete better to be in a local conference. So maybe that made me work harder in terms of the one thing that was different at Ancilla than was different at Divine Heart and at Culver was that you had to be a recruiter. And fortunately, some of the things I learned in business, I was in sales and business for a while. Fortunately, some of the things I learned in sales were the same things that helped me to become a really good recruiter. I taught a lot of my coaches how to be a good recruiter. And I taught them that when they went to recruit a student athlete, it wasn't about what they wanted. It was about what that student athlete wanted. So if you wanted to be a really, really good recruiter, you had to be able to ask really, really good questions. And sometimes you would realize that that student athlete you were recruiting was not a fit for Ancilla College. We were looking for people that were a fit for us. And so I would always say, you know, Ancilla College isn't for everybody, but there are certain people that belong here, and you need to go out, ask questions, and find them. So that's kind of the way that I built my program. Like I say, as I was a coach to the coaches, I kind of tried to help those young men and young ladies that coach for me. I tried to help them understand how to go out and find out what those student athletes wanted, and then bring the ones that fit and Ancilla in.
During your coaching basketball at Ancilla, did you any teams or players that kind of stand out for you there that were?
Well, up until last year, our men's basketball team, which was #1 in the country, went went out and won 28 games. So before that, I had the record where we had won 22 games back in, I believe it was 1998 or 1999. Basketball players that would have stood out would not have been people that you would have recognized. People like Jeremy Gillespie from Elkhart, Kyle Anderson from South Bend. Not very many of local people you'd remember.
But you did have a team that just.
Oh yeah. And then I think it was our second year. We were about 500 or in the middle of the conference in the MCCAA. Being a premier conference in the United States, that was saying something. And once you get to that level, then you get respect, and you have an opportunity to play. So what happened by the end of my career in basketball is that we were playing an all junior college schedule. We were not, when I took over the basketball program, that was not that there was anything wrong with it, but that was the last year that we played Plymouth Lumber. It was kind of, I look at that as kind of an intramural, kind of a schedule. So because of that schedule that we ended up playing nationally and in a local conference, the student athletes that we had got more exposure and got an opportunity. Well, you go to a national tournament. We were in a national tournament. I mean, there'd be 40 or 50 four-year schools that were there looking to recruit. So we gave those student athletes an opportunity to move on. I also had an unhappy experience with that, and that is when we went to Tyler, Texas, ended up fourth in the nation in soccer. There were people there that were trying to recruit coaches, so I ended up losing my soccer coach. But fortunately, the next one that came along had just as good a season as the next one. And I would have to say that the soccer coach I lost recommended the next coach. So, it was a great experience. When I think back on what I wanted to accomplish and what I accomplished when I left, I felt really good that I had been able to do what was the vision that I set out to do, and hopefully that they will continue. But one of the things you realize when you retire is that you can't live in the past. You have to be happy about and satisfied with the progress that you made, and then you hand it off to somebody else, and it's not yours anymore, it's theirs. So what you have to do is look back and say, I was able to do this at this period of time, and be content in that.
So you met your wife, you said, during college, or what was that?
Well, that was an interesting story.
Yeah.
I met my wife in high school. Okay, she was 3 years younger than I was. Now, back in those days, that was probably not very acceptable. You were a junior, you were dating a junior, you were dating a sophomore, but you were not dating a freshman, okay? So when I was a senior, she was a freshman, and I'll have to say this if she ever sees it, but by far the prettiest girl at the high school. But we had a lot in common. My dad, after he got out of the grain elevator business in Tyner, my dad went into local politics here in Marshall County. He was a Marshall County auditor, and her dad was a county commissioner. So we had the same political views and the same spiritual views, and so it was a match made in heaven, if you would. But boy, not very well accepted when I was at high school.
How did she feel when you went down to Florida State?
we were in love, and so I didn't stray, and she didn't stray. She stayed. She stayed true all the way through high school. I stayed true all the way through college. Came back at the end of my college career, got married, and then, like I say, went on to coach at Divine Heart. So one of those, and you'll see it in small high schools like Tyner and Bourbon and Culver and Argus. You'll see quite a few of those where high school sweethearts go on to marry, and we're getting ready here in September to celebrate our 50th. So I say we had 5 or 10 really good years. No, I'm just kidding. I feel very fortunate that we've had a great marriage. I'm kind of the on the road guy, and she's kind of the at home person, and so we had a really good balance with that.
Yeah. So she was, a common thread between a lot of the coaches has been, the sacrifice that you have to make in a lot of ways with the family. And
yeah, I think that maybe I'm wrong. I'll only speak for myself. She made the sacrifice. I didn't make the sacrifice. Sometimes you look back and you say to yourself, did I do the right thing by coaching other people's kids? I still was around for my kids and I coached my kids, but I was not there as much. But she's the one that made the sacrifice. She's the one that fixed the electrical plug. She's the one that learned those skills. So I feel like my wife made the sacrifices. As I look back, I think you can honestly say that you traded some of your athletic successes for that you wish maybe that you would have coached your own kids a little bit more. But I always feel like that God had a direction in my life, and once He gave me the vision, then He protected me and blessed me in that vision. And as long as I stayed into that vision, and I depended on Him, then I was very comfortable with what I was doing. But if you look back, we had 3 kids, and right now my son is a softball coach at Bethel. My other son coaches at the elementary school in Walkerton. So, they turned out really well, but they turned out really well because of their mother. Although I don't think there was any doubt about, I was very unacceptable of you misbehaving. But, for the most part, it was the wife that made the sacrifice, in my opinion.
Were you that way as a coach too, as well?
When I started coaching, I could have thrown the chair out a lot farther than Bob Knight when I started coaching. But I feel like that the longer I was a coach, the more I was like Johnny Wooden than I was Bob Knight. Now, that has nothing to say about their understanding of the game or their fundamentals. It has to do with their attitude. And so, at the very beginning, how do you coach? Well, you coach like the people that coached you. So you don't really have any basis for anything else. But then as you get into it and you get to meet more coaches and you get more attuned to what goes on the national scene and you watch those coaches, you start to think it through. And so I feel very fortunate that I could use anger, but anger never used me at the end. I could use anger, and you'd have players that you understood after you got to know them that a little anger motivated them. You had other players that anger really made them shut down. So you had to understand your players. But I could use anger at the end, but at the beginning, anger used me. I mean, and I remember you asked me about a game. I remember one game that we played at Ancilla. Two games I'll talk to you about. One game at Ancilla where we were playing the #1 team in the conference, okay? And their coach and their coach got so angry that we beat them. We were not a better team than they were, but he had his players so riled up, so excited that they couldn't compete. So, and the second thing that I remember is our conference in MCCAA was probably the premier baseball conference in the country, and that was, we had a team in Grand Rapids, Michigan that won the national conference year after year after year. One of the years that they won the national tournament, the only 2 losses that they had on their schedule was Ancilla College. And during the first game, for whatever reason, their coach got mad, threw a bat against the bench. It bounced back and knocked out his 2 front teeth, and they had to take him to the hospital. So their players were lost. They could not play. He was so important to them. So there's 2 examples of emotions that anger that aren't in your player's best interest. And what's your goal anyhow? It's to give your players the best chance they can to win. That's all you're there. Don't, I've said many times, try to stay out of their way. Give them everything that you can give them, but don't get in their way of an opportunity to win. And you can sure do that if you get angry. You can get angry at players, you can get angry at officials, but for me, I was not an anger person in terms of trying to play the officials. I was an anger person that tried to use a little bit of anger to motivate the players that needed that I knew that they needed that, to get going. They'd be lackadaisical out on the court, and I'd use a little anger and just pick them right up, and they'd go like crazy. So, you're sitting here thinking you do remember some things that you didn't remember before.
At least you didn't actually throw a chair, though, right?
Oh, no. I didn't, but I try to use that as an analogy of the difference between when I started and when I finished. Yeah. No, I didn't actually ever throw a chair. Although I still think I could have thrown one farther.
So in those early days, were there technical fouls involved and that kind of stuff? Or?
I never got thrown out of a game.
That's good.
But I got technical fouls. And one of the things that I learned about arguing with the officials, hardly ever gave you a technical foul if you looked them in the eye. So what I would do is I'd walk down the court and I'd tell them my point of view, and then the minute they'd turn around, I'd start walking back to the bench. So I learned that you could talk to the officials. You could talk to them with a little anger as long as you didn't look to them in the eye, and you could also talk to them as long as you weren't angry. But yeah, unfortunately, like all coaches, you get better and you learn how to be a better coach, as you continue doing it. When you start out, you don't do things as well as you did when you finished up. So, yeah, bad part of my coaching career.
That's been a pretty common theme.
Yeah.
With coaches is, they kind of settled down a little bit as the years went on, and yeah.
I would think that they would have. Think that they would have just recognized that it wasn't in their best interest, and it wasn't in their players' best interest, and that's what they were there for. To do what they could to get out of the way of the players. So, yeah, I'm sure that other people had those experiences too.
Oh
yeah.
Yeah. How the impact that sports has had on your life? What would you?
So as I told you before earlier on, there were three things that made an impact on my life. Athletics. Athletics was probably one of the major impacts in my life, a driver in my life. I had an opportunity to be seen by a scout from Florida State in a Legion game. At Tyner High School, every teacher cared about you, but I'm sure that we didn't have, because it was a small school and didn't pay as much, I'm sure that there were teachers there that were very kind and really good and looked out for your best interest, but maybe they weren't the best teachers in the county. Maybe I wasn't the best student, so that I don't want to blame them, but what did I succeed in? Athletics. So you succeeded in athletics, and it drove me from Tyner to Florida State. Okay? You were successful in athletics at Florida State. You went into coaching. It drove you to Divine Heart. You were coaching at Divine Heart, and it drove you to Culver. Like I say, I went into business there for a period of time, and then what did I do when I got out of business? I went into Ancilla, into athletics. So, athletics has been, like I say, one of the major drivers in my life. And if it hadn't been for athletics, I have no idea what I would have done.
So what do you think it was about? Yeah, was it the competition, or was there some kind of drive in you to?
Well, number one, it was the thing that I had the most success in. I came out of high school with a B average, but I probably could have come out of high school with a B average if I'd have just signed the diploma and not gone to class and whatever. I know I worked hard and I learned a lot, but I was a good enough student that I could get a B. But I had to really work hard to be successful in athletics. And so it taught me that the other thing about athletics is two things. One athletics teaches you is that you have to work hard to be successful. And the other thing that athletic teaches you, and most coaches probably don't want to talk about this, but it teaches you how to fail. It teaches you that baseball especially, lose today, new day tomorrow. Don't let yesterday's game, when you're in the field, don't make an error today because of something that you did yesterday. So you fail, yeah, and we all fail in a lot of different areas, but you fail today, but tomorrow's a brand new day, and you pick it up from there, and you don't let that failure influence you at all. The other thing about athletics is that especially when you go to a place like Florida State and you know nobody, you have an already created family. You have an already created group of individuals that have the same interests that you do. And so right away, you're readily acceptable, and you have friends that help you and you help them, and you have a problem, you talk to them. So I believe that those are really the major things that, and the other thing athletics taught me is that if you're going to be successful in athletics, find out what other people want. That's not what you want, but what does other people want? Help them achieve their dreams. They'll help you achieve your dreams. So, like I say, it's been it was huge. Like I say, it's been a major driver in my life. I have no idea what I would have done in life if it hadn't been for athletics.